Today we're going to look at a brewer that I've been putting off for a while. That is the moka pot. I was never really interested in the moka pot. It just didn't catch my eye as an interesting brewer. So I never really looked at one or used one until now. A couple of weeks ago, I used a moka pot for the first time, and the coffee that it made was good and it was really easy to use. And so I gained a lot more interest in this brewer. Recently, I bought a small 2-cup Bialetti moka pot, the original moka pot. I've been using it every morning for the past couple of days, and I've formed some opinions and thoughts on it. So today we're going to look at the history of the moka pot, the kind of coffee that it makes, and how to use it. Alfonso Bialetti, an Italian engineer and metal worker who had nearly a decade of experience in the French aluminium industry, opened up his own aluminium workshop in Crucenalo in 1919. His workshop made all kinds of household wares out of aluminium, a cutting-edge technology at the time. At this time, during the Great Depression, going out to a bar to have an espresso, have a coffee, was an absolute luxury. It was pretty much exclusive to men with money. Alfonso wanted to change this. He wanted to bring the coffee experience back home. He set out to make a device that was easy to use and cheap, making espresso accessible to everyone. Now, the legend says that Alfonso got the inspiration for the design of this device, this coffee brewer, by observing his wife Ada doing the laundry using a traditional French washing device called a lessiveuse. This device was basically a bucket with a cone in the middle, and what you would do is you'd fill it up with cold soapy water. You'd place your clothes in around the cone in the bucket. You'd place it over a open flame or a heat source of some kind. And as the water in the bottom of the device boiled, it would form steam. That steam would get trapped, force the water up through the cone and then out through a spray head at the top. And this would spray down onto the clothes, trickle down through the clothes to the bottom, and then recirculate back up. And it was this perpetual machine. Alfonso based the design of his device on this machine, and he then released the first moka pots in 1933 as a small-scale operation just for the people in his neighborhood and the surrounding areas. Over time, Alfonso would slowly grow his business until World War II hit, and then everything stopped. Italy would face massive aluminium and coffee shortages, putting a complete halt on production and nearly killing the business. Immediately after the war, Alfonso's son, Renato Bialetti, would take over the business and completely scrap all other production of household wares and other aluminium goods to focus purely on the moka pot. He focused all of his time and energy on this device. Renato would heavily invest in advertisement, hiring an artist, Paul Campani, to make a caricature of himself. And this would become the mascot that we all associate with Bialetti, the little man with the moustache. And that heavy advertisement would pay off big time. As Italy's economy recovered and people's incomes rose, the Bialetti brand and the moka pot would sweep across Italy, gaining massive popularity. And with travel, Italians bringing their moka pots with them on holiday, it would gain worldwide interest. The moka pot is now found in millions of homes all over the world, and the original Bialetti moka pot's design has barely changed. And that's the history of the moka pot. Now we're going to talk about how it works and the kind of coffee that it makes. Going back to the French lessiveuse, the moka pot is very similar in its design. The moka pot has 3 parts to it. So you have the bottom half of the brewer, the base, that holds your cold water. This compartment is completely sealed by the top half of the brewer, and inside it creates lots of pressure and steam which then forces the water up through the brewer. You've got a pressure release valve in case you go over pressure. The bit in between the bottom and top compartments of the brewer is your basket. It's a basket with a tapered like cylinder or cone at the bottom. The water travels up through there and through a screen. The water then goes through the coffee and compresses it in the process from the pressure. And then it passes through the screen at the top. So underneath the top of the brewer, you've got another screen. That's just to prevent the grounds from getting into your coffee. The coffee then moves through that screen and up through the cone and out into the collector, the top of the brewer. And that's how the moka pot works. It's really as simple as that. Now, before we go on to talk about how to use the brewer, there's a couple of things that I want to talk about. The first is aluminium in kitchenware and things that come into contact with food. You might hear that the original Bialetti moka pot is made with aluminium and immediately not want to use it and distrust it. There's this thing around cooking with aluminium and it leaching heavy metals into your food or whatever you're cooking. It's true that heavy metals do leach into the thing that you're cooking when you use aluminium, but this has been studied. The amount of heavy metal exposure that you get from using a Bialetti moka pot falls under 1% of your recommended or safe weekly intake of heavy metals. This is reduced the more that you use the brewer. As you use the brewer and it develops a patina, sort of like coffee on the brewer to sort of form a coating, your heavy metal exposure goes down. However, if you clean the brewer with hot soapy water or put it in a dishwasher, your exposure rises up to around 3 or 4%. So it's highly advised that you do not thoroughly clean an aluminium Bialetti brewer. All you need to do to clean it is just use some hot water and a soft sponge and just go around the worst parts of it. And that's pretty much it. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing that I want to talk about is this misconception that moka pot coffee is espresso. It's not in the way that you think. Moka pot coffee is traditional espresso. Pre-Gaggia, all espresso was made with steam pressure, below 2 bars of pressure. And so the moka pot replicates this. So the moka pot does make espresso, it makes traditional espresso, the original espresso, but it doesn't make espresso as we know it today. Now we've got those things out the way, let's talk about using the brewer and the recipe that I've been using. Using this brewer is really simple. All you've got to do is fill the bottom compartment with cold water up to just underneath the pressure release valve or about halfway. For coffee, if your grinder has a moka pot setting, then start with that and try it out. But generally you want a grind size that's sort of like fine sand, nowhere near the grind size, the fineness of espresso, because remember, this is steam pressure that we're using. You want to grind enough coffee to fill the basket. For this brewing method, I'm keeping it really simple and not striving for consistency or accuracy. So we're just filling up the basket until it's full. You want to distribute the grounds slightly. So what I like to do is hold it by the bottom, the cone, and just tap the side, and that does a good job of distributing the grounds. It's important that you don't compact this bed down too much. It's going to, as you brew with it anyway, because of the pressure it pushes up against the bed, and that will do the compacting for you. Once the basket's full, you're just going to place that in the bottom part of the brewer, and then you want to screw the top half of the brewer onto the bottom quite tight. If you don't do it tight enough, the water can kind of spray out of the sides of the brewer, so you want to make sure that it's locked on pretty tight. Now for temperature, you don't want to be on full blast, but I'm kind of impatient, so I'm going slightly hotter than some would recommend. You'll likely get the best results if you use a low temperature and allow the water to slowly boil and come up to temperature. That way you don't burn the coffee. As it increases in temperature, you'll start to hear the boiling, and then eventually the steam will push the water slowly up through the grounds and like we were talking about, through the cone and then out through those spouts. Once the coffee starts to foam, you want to take it off the heat source. You also want to keep the lid shut for this, as sometimes the coffee can spray out and sputter. If you leave it on the heat source, it burns the coffee and just creates a bad taste. And now the coffee has finished brewing. So what I like to do here is put a teaspoon of sugar in an espresso cup and then dissolve that with the espresso. And that's how I like to serve it. Some people like to add milk to it for a slightly longer drink, hot water to make sort of an Americano. The flavor profile of this kind of coffee is very mellow, very smooth, nowhere near the intensity of a modern espresso, and I quite like that. In the mornings, I don't really like to drink a strong coffee. This moka pot espresso has been quite enjoyable. Overall, this brewer is really convenient to use, and that's the end of this video. That is the history of the moka pot and how to use it. By the way, I'm doing one-to-one online video calls and tutoring, so if you want to learn more about coffee, or you've got a particular problem that you're having trouble getting to the bottom of and solving, then hit me up. I'll put a link down in the description. And if you want to support me, what I'm doing, and this channel, then you can do so at Buy Me a Coffee. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. If you liked this video and want to see similar content in the future, subscribe, turn on notifications, give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.